Throughout my years of reviewing, I've come across a lot of bad messages and morals. Hell, even since my MLP days when I covered episodes like One Bad Apple or Dragon Quest. Sometimes the morals had good intentions, but were poorly thought out in the writing. And other times, not so much. However, there is another way that media teaches lessons that isn't quite so explicit, and that's implicitly. I brought up unfortunate implications a lot over the years, but that's not quite what I'm talking about. Television paints a very television review of reality, which I touched upon in my Soul review. In most television shows, every single problem is solved in 22 minutes, and every family exists in this picture-perfect world. At least that's how it used to be. Today we've got a lot of deconstructionist shows, like BoJack Horseman, and all kinds of others that try to pick apart tropes and understand why media exists the way that it does. However, at a certain point, doing that becomes another television reality. The sitcom world that I and BoJack Horseman painted existed in the 80s and the 90s, and in turn, we got responses to them. Shows like Family Matters and Full House get responses from shows like The Simpsons and Malcolm in the Middle. They showcased how the world wasn't all saccharine and happy, and eventually those kind of shows created another kind of cartoon television view of reality, where everything sucks and things never get any better, and no matter what you do, you will never succeed. And just like Full House is damaging on that level, Malcolm in the Middle is also damaging on the same level, if you can believe that. It's a show that, to this day, I cannot watch. Yeah, me. This is the guy who subjects himself to films like Elf Bowling and the Emoji Movie, and shows like Adult Party Cartoon for a living. No, Malcolm in the Middle is where I draw the line. But it's more about personal issues than the quality of the show itself. It, reminds me a little bit too much of my childhood in a sense. We shout down Full House because that's not what reality is. When you do that and hold up Malcolm in the Middle as quote-unquote reality, when your own reality looks like that cartoon sitcom world, it tends to normalize the bad aspects of your own reality. Because virtually every fucking show on television was like this, with abusive and apathetic parents that didn't give a damn, and seemed to actively hate their kids. That can make it seem like a bad real-life situation was either normal or not that bad in comparison. Which is colors that, painted my childhood reality. It's not so much any one show's fault, even Malcolm in the Middle, but it's a trend and a continual reality painted by the media establishment as a whole. It actually has a name. It's called the CSI effect, named after the show CSI. The idea is basically this. Because every single crime show ever, especially CSI, juries are more likely to acquit because they've been led to believe that they need more and more forensic evidence that's unrealistic for any actual investigation to happen. Or on the flip side, that forensic evidence is unfailable. It goes beyond just crime shows as well. Mental illness and disorders get this worse from the CSI effect. On television, people with autism are more likely to be Rain Man or completely unable to talk than be say, me. Cause if the character wasn't completely debilitated, how would the audience know that the character had autism? However, in my opinion, postpartum depression gets it the absolute worst. Where according to television and the media, the most common symptom of postpartum depression is infanticide. Because that's dramatic and shit. How much media affects people is definitely under debate. People with bad motives try to argue that violent video games will turn you into a shooter or a Nazi or whatever, when that's not how it works at all, even ignoring the fact that most of society says that these things are bad. Even when a video game has you starring a character that's explicitly going on a murder rampage, it's painted as a very bad thing. The goal of the game Hatred is to just kill random people, but nowhere does it say that that's a moral or a good thing to be doing. And just the tone of the game makes it clear that you are the villain in that game. No, the way that the media warps feelings is with something like the concept of best friends forever. This is pretty much a staple of children's media at least. In every single show ever, you got your main character, and they got one or maybe two or three best friends. Every Arnold needs a Gerald. Every Harry needs a Ron and Hermione. They got the main kids from Recess, the main kids from The Weekenders, the main kids from Kids Next Door. I could go on and on. Ed and Eddie, Code Lyoko, Chalk Zone, SpongeBob. Hell, it's even in some adult shows like Family Guy and Peter's Friends. It's pretty ubiquitous. Sometimes Arnold and Gerald fight, but they're back together by the end of the episode. And whenever we get a glimpse into the future, we gotta know that all the kids next door still know each other. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are still friends. It's a nice story, and I mean, that's all it really is. A story. Let me get the rub out of the way. Best friends forever in real life are extremely, extremely rare. Chances are you will not have a friend that will go through your entire life. I mean, it's a sad, depressing fact of life that most friends are products of circumstance. Sharing clubs, sharing neighborhoods, sharing classes, sharing jobs. And when those circumstances disappear, friendships are unlikely to follow except in rare cases. I don't know if what I said is shocking or controversial or whatever, I know that a lot of my audience is young and probably on like their first best friend, so let's take a look at a specific case. Ed, and Eddie. Do you really expect that trio to be friends into adulthood? Double D is of such a different lifestyle and morality that it's clear that they have different paths set in life. A modern Ed and Eddie reunion would have Double D come back from college, see that his old friends are still grifting, now to pay rent and not just get jawbreakers, and he would probably have some kindness for them at first, but as they continue to fail to improve their own circumstances, he'd get fed up and kick them out. What, is that too depressing for this modern era of media where everything needs to be deep and realistic and depressing as shit? Honestly, in terms of modern media, this is one of my biggest issues of what a lot of it does. Deconstruction is a very prominent attitude this day and age. We seek our BoJack Horseman to tell us why that sitcom idea is terrible and how badly it affected everyone and everything behind the scenes, and how insidious it really is. And this is fine and good, but at some point you've got to put the pieces back together, or else you're gonna get something like Family Guy's Brian's a Bad Father. It goes on and on saying, see, Brian Griffin is really bad at being a parent. And at some point it makes you ask, okay, well, what's the point of all of this? Why are you telling me this? Why should I care? Honestly, what is the point of all of this? Depressing realism, deconstruction, and so on. Nah, I got nothing except that it makes writers feel smart to break apart the bullshit of their forebears while creating a new flavor of mock reality themselves. Because, as a creator, deconstruction is actually only half of the battle. And while many shows have this half of the battle really well, they haven't even really began to fight the other. If you deconstruct a building, all you're gonna get is a pile of rubble. And it's not a creator's job to make a pile of rubble. You gotta make a better building. That's where reconstruction comes in. Reconstruction is when you realize that Full House is full of bullshit and has a bunch of things that couldn't possibly exist in reality, built upon sitcom tropes and trends. You deconstruct that and you pull it apart at the seams, getting something like Malcolm in the Middle. And from there, you figure out what you lost along the way and you try to connect the two, building something up. For instance, Lois from Malcolm in the Middle is going to die alone, and the family is going to fall apart because they're dysfunctional. And considering the finale of Malcolm in the Middle, she's absolutely delusional, stopping Malcolm from getting a high-paying job so he can go to college to be president or some shit. Well, I guess it's karma knowing now the only thing she's going to get from fucking Malcolm over is spending the rest of her life paying off his debt, when his college didn't guarantee him a goddamn job. In response to shows like Malcolm in the Middle and The Simpsons, you get Gumball. In many ways, The Amazing World of Gumball is a deconstruction show. It plays with the conventions of a television show. From reruns to retcons and the status quo's God, they're all episodes that pick those concepts apart. But at the same time, it's a reconstruction, putting things back together. Malcolm in the Middle lost something from Full House, and that's that the family actually gave a fuck about each other. Amazing World of Gumball is never really saccharine, and the family is definitely not well off. Hell, it has a similar setup to The Simpsons. But it doesn't paint a world where the mother is constantly seeking a divorce or the dad is outright strangling his kids. And in turn, it becomes a more believable family than either Full House or Malcolm in the Middle, despite it being the only one of the three that had adopted a fish who had sprouted legs. To be honest, reconstructing media is incredibly rewarding. Like, as a writer, it is one of the things that I find the most enjoyable and the most fulfilling. Like the best friends forever thing. This is a trope that has actually annoyed me for a very long time in media because it's just so patently bullshit in the face of reality. But at the same time, it is completely ubiquitous. I've been alive for a long time at this point, and there have been points where former quote-unquote lifelong friends have proven not to be. And when you live in a world where best friends forever are supposed to be a thing, just the normal average moving on your own path becomes the most devastating, heart-wrenching thing. You act desperate and stupid, and it makes the problem even worse. Because you believe that this isn't something that's supposed to be happening, like, ever, unless you really, really fuck up. But it is something that happens, and it's normal. So, what did I do in response to all of this? Write about a friendship that fell apart and characters getting old and embittered at that fact? No, I didn't. In my series, Growing Around, Sally has these two close friends, her best friends, April and Molly. And throughout the start of the series, we see that they are very close friends. One script has one of them, Molly, working too hard, so the others try to get her to relax. One day on their adventures, they come across this old house in the middle of the woods that turns out to be a clubhouse of these former group of friends from a couple of decades back, called the Treasure Trackers. Sally wants to track it down, but the other two have prior obligations. So Sally goes on this one alone. In her investigations, she learns that the Treasure Trackers broke apart, but not due to some dramatic argument, as she and the television reality would have thought. No, they broke apart because one of them moved away. The friends tried to keep in touch, but every single day the calls got shorter and shorter, and further apart, because there wasn't really news each and every day, until finally there was just nothing new to talk about, which is how it happens in reality. Despite this, though, Sally freaks out. In her mind, if she did everything right, she would be friends with April and Molly for the rest of her life. The possibility of things just slowly and silently fading shatters her worldview, and she acts desperate, even resorting to stealing her friend's property to try and stop her from leaving on a trip. There are a lot of side messages to the episode, like freaking out about a terrible event you can't prevent is a bad idea, but the main one is that Sally learns that she should appreciate her friendships more in the now, and not let this fear turn you into someone that no one wants to be a friend with in the first place. And I think that this affects my show for the better in the long run. No matter what drama the Recess kids get into, you know that they're going to be together throughout the show and beyond. However, throughout Growing Around, Sally and her friends' friendships get tested again and again. Most notably when a singer that Sally and Molly not only love, but actually met over is revealed to be a terrible person by none other than April. It drives their friendship to the brink. In the episodes where things aren't tested like this, we constantly see three friends support each other. We see the positives of that old worldview, which are more savory with the concerns of the new. I do this a lot with my writing, Growing Around especially, but I don't just limit it there. Like that singer episode I mentioned, it goes a lot into the audience aspect of cancel culture. How to feel about the media of awful people, even knowing outright with undeniable proof that they are not good people. Anyone can break something apart. It's not hard. I should know I do it for a living. But putting it back together in a stronger way is something that I think is way too undervalued. I mean, it's not the hardest thing in the world to do either. Just take a media stereotype, have someone take that to heart, let it affect and change them, and simply have them go through the nuances of reality. Be yourself is another explicit moral in shows that I really do not like. If I were to just deconstruct it, I'd have an asshole try to learn that lesson. The more that the asshole decides to be himself, the worse that everyone is, and it shows everyone how stupid be yourself really is. However, Reconstruction is like this. You got a pretty shy person who doesn't take many chances with his life. He just has a calm, quiet life and doesn't really get too excited. However, they want to impress their crush, who just so happens to be a daredevil. They're given the off-cited romantic advice to be yourself. They try doing that, and as you might have guessed, it doesn't go too well. They end up practically invisible. However, when they start trying to improve themselves, not just be themselves, but being their best selves, things work a lot better. I do stuff like this all the time. Not in every single script. Sometimes I just write 22 minutes of fun, but I try to make all of the morals and messages that I can as complex as this, even more so, because there's a lot of nuances here, and you don't get them just by going to the traditional sitcom messages, or just outright discarding them. And I definitely like to talk about how I do other messages and such as we go on. Until next time though, remember that life isn't all picture perfect, but considering it nothing but dour and depressing is just as much of a lie as the sitcoms of the 80s and the 90s.